If there was one man that rolls the dice with the devil, it might have to be Cuban leader Fidel Castro. One of his most significant gambles came with the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the U.S. and Cuba and the former Soviet Union were literally at a nuclear standoff. Now, nearly half a century after that incident, Fidel talks nuclear again, only this time he cautions that the nuclear powers are trigger-happy and could offset a dangerous war of the nukes. To analyze Fidel's words and its implications on the nuclear debate is Brian Becker, the national coordinator for the Answer Coalition. Now, Brian, you're very familiar with this incident, of course, beforehand, which would really insinuate this was the Bay of Pigs invasion. And I'm just wondering what you make of Fidel's words and his warning to the rest of the world, given his experience with what happened back in the 1960s.
Well, not only Fidel Castro's experience with the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, but the fact that he's been a paramount leader on the world stage, involved in world politics, commenting on world politics for 5 decades, probably the longest political leader alive today who still has this kind of authority. And he has been taking to the airwaves recently. He's been writing over and over again, warning that an imminent attack is possible, he even believes likely or inevitable, between the U.S. and Israel on one side and the government of Iran on the other. And so he's using all of his considerable prestige and weight in the world politics to sound the alarm and say, unless the world acts quickly, there will be a confrontation between the U.S. and Israel and Iran. And he believes that it's very likely that this will accelerate into a nuclear conflict.
You know, some people might see some irony here in the fact that Fidel Castro is coming out and talking about the nuclear crisis on everyone's part, from Iran, Israel, and the United States. Can we just look a bit at Fidel Castro's experience during the Cuban Missile Crisis and how, of course, his coordination with the former USSR and the United States in a campaign to quash any kind of revolution in Latin America contributed to all of this. So does it seem as though what happened then is sort of playing out now in the world theater with Iran, and that's sort of something he's trying to get to in his latest comments?
Well, there are differences, but there are very similar parallels, too. The United States government targeted the Cuban government for overthrow. They planned and carried out an invasion. They, at the same time, were encircling the Soviet Union with missiles in Turkey and elsewhere. The Soviets, trying to create some equilibrium, asked the Cubans to place strategic or mid-level nuclear weapons in Cuba. Cuba went along with that as an attempt to create an equilibrium so that the U.S. could not carry out military aggression, nuclear aggression against the Soviet Union and against Cuba. The final way that that standoff resolved is that the Soviets took the missiles out and the United States pledged not to invade Cuba. Today, the United States is targeting another government for overthrow, the Iranian government. Not because it's a socialist government the way Fidel's government was, but because it wants to be independent, as Cuba did, and it wants to control its own resources, its own land, its own airspace. And right now, the United States is using Israel, and Israel is using its relationship with the United States to undoubtedly plan for, in an advanced stage of contingency planning at least, some sort of major confrontation with Iran. Israel took out Iraq's nuclear weapons, peaceful nuclear program in 1981, a preemptive attack, a war of aggression. They did the same to Syria in 2007. It's very possible right now that this could happen again.
Now, I want to ask you if this is going to have any kind of effect on the U.S.-Cuba relationship, as you know, has been strained since that crisis.
Well, I think the Obama administration, sadly for many of the people who expected change from Bush, has actually put more pressure on the Cuban government, has accelerated its subversion of Cuba. The Cubans, I feel, are looking at the Obama administration with great disappointment because they were hoping for an end to the blockade, or at least a partial end to the blockade. Instead, they've gotten more and more subversion. Clearly, the Cubans want normalization of relations, but it's very interesting that Fidel Castro, with all of the problems in the U.S.-Cuba relationship, is focusing world public opinion on the Middle East because he really believes that the United States, in league with Israel, is about to carry out a catastrophic aggression against Iran. Iran will fight back, and that this will in turn trigger a major, major world confrontation, including the possible use of nuclear weapons. Israel has 200 nuclear weapons. The United States has 5,000 nuclear weapons. Iran has no nuclear weapons.
Well, it's a very fascinating insight there, Brian, and I mean, I appreciate your mentioning all the different parallels in this. It's Brian Becker. He's the national coordinator with the Answer Coalition.
Thank you.